a quarterback. Shedeur is smiling in his spot. Question is if he's letting that be his umbrella or is he a New York Giant? Daniel Jeremiah, you said it was going to be a trade-up for Jackson Dart last night. Is that what you think?
I felt like that was their preference with the quarterbacks.
He should be pushing for leverage.
Yeah. Excellent. If I said gun, diesel, right, 56, F my canner, who's running the shallow?
Nah.
Who's running the curl?
The X. Running the post. The Z.
Who's running the middle?
The Y.
Good. All right. Let's play one more game.
The Shedeur Sanders draft controversy is officially back in the spotlight, and this time it's dragging the New York Giants straight into the middle of the storm. What was once quiet chatter has now turned into loud, unavoidable noise across league circles, draft rooms, and social media timelines everywhere. New footage has recently surfaced showing a tense and uncomfortable interview with Jackson Dart, an interview that sources inside the Giants previously labeled as awkward and disappointing. The footage confirmed what insiders hinted at for months. The vibe was stiff, the energy was off. The answers didn't exactly jump off the screen. And yet, despite releasing that footage, the Giants are still refusing to make Shedeur Sanders' interview public. And that silence is doing more damage by the day. That decision alone has sparked massive speculation. Fans, analysts, and even former executives are now asking the same uncomfortable question.
Despite the fact that Shedeur Sanders had the fewest attempts, he was the most efficient and most productive with the fewest reps. So the quarterback tracker for those radio audience members, Flacco was 9 for 14 and a touchdown. Pickett, 9 for 16, no touchdown. Dylan Gabriel, 11 of 16, 2 touchdowns and a pick. And Sanders, 7 of 9, 3 touchdowns, no picks. This, Justin, I've seen enough. I'm calling it a wrap. The Herd newsroom is calling it in Ohio.
If Jackson Dart's interview was so bad that it could be released, then why is Shedeur Sanders' interview still being kept behind closed doors? What are they protecting? And more importantly, who are they protecting? This situation has gone from mild curiosity to full-blown controversy. Was Sanders truly the issue during the interview process? Or has he been unfairly framed by a narrative that conveniently shaped itself behind closed doors? The pressure is mounting, and the calls for transparency are getting louder by the hour. People aren't buying vague reports anymore. They want proof, they want context, they want the full tape. Critics across the NFL landscape are now demanding the release of the full Shedeur Sanders interview, not clips, not summaries, not whispers from unnamed sources. Fans want to see for themselves whether the negative chatter around Sanders was real or manufactured, because right now, it's starting to feel less like evaluation and more like reputation management. This growing demand for transparency is shaking up the entire draft process. It's forcing fans to question how NFL teams truly conduct evaluations behind closed doors. Interviews are supposed to clarify things, not cloud them. And yet here we are, stuck with one quarterback's flaws being shown publicly while another's evaluation remains sealed tight. So what really happened in that interview room? Was Shedeur Sanders wrongly judged before he ever sat down?
Jackson Dart, you show a man-to-man coverage, he'll make the throw.
Okay.
Zone coverage, though?
Yeah. But that's typically harder, I think, the zones, if the quarterbacks. I'm going to say they made a bad decision. They should have got Shedeur.
Or is there something more layered going on that teams aren't ready to admit publicly? That question became even louder after Albert Breer weighed in, claiming that Sanders was significantly behind both Jackson Dart and Cam Ward in terms of draft potential. According to Breer, Sanders' performance, especially when facing pressure, placed him a step behind those two quarterbacks, who he believes came into the process with more polished and pro-ready skill sets. That statement alone lit up debate across the league because plenty of scouts strongly disagree. When you actually look at Shedeur Sanders' college career, it becomes impossible to ignore the leadership and composure he displayed on the biggest stages. He didn't operate in quiet environments. He didn't hide behind elite defenses. He led one of the most high-profile programs in the country while carrying massive expectations every single week. Sanders faced relentless pressure, constant scrutiny, and non-stop spotlight, yet he consistently elevated his play when his team needed him most. Tight games, hostile environments, must-win moments. He didn't flinch. His command of the offense, his decision-making, and his confidence never wavered. And the numbers back that up loud and clear.
The closer we got to the draft, the stronger I felt about it. That at first I said that this was in January, February. I was like, I'm starting to think the gap between Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders is bigger than the gap between Shedeur Sanders and the pack. It's clear as day. They preferred Jackson Dart. And I'm not even talking about Cam Ward now. So this idea, half of me thinks it's not fair to Shedeur.
While Dart and Ward absolutely showed flashes of their talent, Sanders handled a completely different level of responsibility. He wasn't just playing quarterback. He was managing expectations, personalities, and momentum, all while keeping his team competitive in high-pressure situations. Now let's talk numbers, because the stats tell a story that the narrative keeps trying to ignore. Start with completion percentage, one of the most important indicators of quarterback consistency. Sanders finished with an elite 74% completion rate, leading this entire group. Jackson Dart sits at 69.3%, while Cam Ward trails at 67.2%! That gap matters. Accuracy matters. Consistency matters. Completing passes at that rate shows command, rhythm, and control, traits that translate directly to the NFL game. Sanders wasn't just throwing the ball, he was placing it where it needed to be. Then there's touchdowns. Sanders finished the season with 37 passing touchdowns, just 2 behind Cam Ward's 39. Dart, meanwhile, finished with 29, a noticeable gap. Despite not chasing raw yardage totals, Sanders consistently turned drives into points, which is exactly what NFL teams claim they value most. When it mattered most, Sanders delivered. Red zone efficiency, third down confidence, situational awareness. These aren't flashy combine metrics, but they win football games. And yet somehow,
Shedeur, it was about going and finding a fit somewhere. And there was no one who saw it that way. And I wrote it, I said it until I was blue in the face. And the closer we got to the draft, the stronger I felt about it. That at first I said that this was in January, February. I was like, I'm starting to think the gap between Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders is bigger than the gap between Shedeur Sanders and the pack.
Those strengths continue to be downplayed while vague concerns dominate the conversation. And that's why this controversy refuses to go away. Because the tape, the numbers, and the leadership don't line up with the narrative being pushed. Until that interview footage is released, the questions will only get louder. The controversy took a sharp and aggressive turn once the spotlight shifted back to Shedeur Sanders' interview with the New York Giants. What made this moment explosive wasn't what was proven, but what was assumed. There was no concrete evidence showing Sanders did anything wrong in that interview room. Yet criticism came fast and loud. Almost instantly, public opinion flipped. Critics rushed in, piling on speculation and labeling his interview performance as a so-called red flag without ever seeing the full footage. Instead of facts, the conversation was driven by leaked opinions and secondhand descriptions. And once that momentum started, it became hard to slow down. One of the loudest voices to jump in was Colin Cowherd, who never hesitates to go straight for the jugular. Cowherd didn't ease into his take. He flat out labeled Sanders' interview with the Giants as the worst he had ever seen, a statement that instantly sent shockwaves across the sports media landscape. Cowherd pointed to one specific moment that stuck with him. According to his account, Sanders was presented with multiple game scenarios and asked how he would respond. Sanders reportedly said he wasn't the person for the occasion, a phrase that quickly became ammunition for critics everywhere.
And Shedeur apparently didn't take to it well. And at one point, one of the few teams that actually was interested in him said, well, what do you make of this really bad play? And Shedeur said, maybe I'm not the guy for you. That's not the answer. Since there were only 3 or 4 teams in the first round that were going to consider it, now that Pittsburgh apparently has a deal with Aaron Rodgers, so take them.
To Cowherd, that answer represented a massive mistake. He framed it as a lack of confidence, a failure to understand what NFL teams want from a quarterback, and a moment that raised serious questions about Sanders' self-awareness. In Cowherd's eyes, franchise quarterbacks are supposed to demand the moment, not distance themselves from it. But that version of events wasn't the only one circulating. Albert Breer stepped in with a very different explanation, one that painted a far more complex picture of what actually happened inside that interview room. According to Breer, Sanders wasn't struggling with basic questions or avoiding responsibility. Instead, he was shown a video filled with multiple mistakes and breakdowns on the play, then asked to analyze and identify each error.
Shedeur Sanders was reportedly pissed at the Giants during his private pre-draft visit. They give players an install, and there are mistakes intentionally put in the install. He didn't catch them and got called out. He was pissed they did that to him. Some teams say they had him as a third-day option. Normally, Joe, what they do with the quarterback, they're bringing in the quarterback, they'll send plays and look, okay, here's the plays we want you to break them down, want you to diagram. Now, Ocho, you know the plays long now. So they tell the quarterback this. They show it to him on the board. Then it goes dark. They say, okay, go draw the play on the board. And they want you to regurgitate what you told them. Because as a quarterback, you have to have great recall. The Giants sent him plays to install, intentionally put mistakes in.
The issue wasn't effort. The issue was clarity. Sanders reportedly couldn't locate what the evaluators were looking for, which naturally led to visible frustration. That frustration, Breer explained, may have been interpreted the wrong way. Not as confusion, but as attitude. Not as engagement, but as resistance. And once that perception formed, it stuck. Now here's where the controversy really deepens. If the Giants were comfortable releasing Jackson Dart's interview footage, why hasn't Shedeur Sanders' interview video been made public? That question refuses to go away. Transparency suddenly feels selective, and selective transparency always creates suspicion. If other quarterbacks had their interviews dissected, replayed, and debated publicly, why is Sanders' footage still locked away? What's in that tape that the Giants don't want fans to judge for themselves? Or is the organization simply trying to avoid pouring more gasoline on an already raging fire? Critics didn't wait for answers. They rushed in again, spinning theories and pushing narratives without hesitation. And the media wasn't far behind. Even Colin Cowherd doubled down, expanding the criticism beyond football. He began labeling Sanders and his family as egoistic, accusing them of being too selective and too controlling about where Sanders should land in the draft. What started as speculation about an interview performance quickly mutated into something far bigger. The focus shifted away from arm talent, accuracy, and leadership, and instead locked in on attitude, personality, and perception.
He didn't catch the mistakes. They told him, he got upset, they didn't tell him.
Teams have to do their just due when it comes to these meetings, these interviews. There are a lot of people, Unc, that play the game of football that can go into these meetings and these interviews and ace them. And you turn on the film, they sorry than the motherfucker.
You're right.
We know what you get with Shedeur when he plays the game of football on Sunday. I know what I get on the field. Why even play this game? What game are we playing? What are you proving by purposely putting mistakes in there?
Why play these games? Why put the mistakes in there?
When you turn the film on, Uncle Ocho, when you watching Shedeur, for me, it's like the film shows the poise and patience that he has in the pocket. I feel like his talent will show an in-game situation.
And I think God put him in this position and sending him to Cleveland on purpose to give him that drive and that hunger to show everyone that passed on him, and obviously show the Cleveland Browns that you made the right decision. You're going to beat everybody. He might not beat Flacco out.
Flacco going to have 350, 3 touchdowns, but 3 picks too now. Now, Flacco here, he go opportunity employer. He going to have.
Ability was no longer the headline. Character narratives took over. One of the most talked about moments in this entire saga came during a segment with Stephen A. Smith. That's when former NFL MVP Cam Newton weighed in with his own blunt assessment of Sanders. Newton didn't sugarcoat his opinion. He suggested that Sanders has a tendency to shy away from direct competition and major challenges. According to Newton, Sanders' confidence sometimes drifts into dangerous territory, bordering on self-absorption. Newton implied that Sanders carries himself like he genuinely believes no one else in the draft class belongs on his level. That comment alone exploded across social media, instantly becoming another talking point in an already crowded controversy. And just like that, the narrative shifted again. Less about film, less about production, less about results. More about perception, tone, and how confidence is interpreted when it doesn't fit the traditional mold. But here's where the entire narrative starts to crack wide open. If Shedeur Sanders was truly as bad as some critics painted him to be during the draft process, then how do you explain what happened next? Why did voices that once tore him down suddenly flip their stance once football actually started being played again? Take Colin Cowherd, for example. Just months ago, Cowherd was one of Sanders' loudest critics. He questioned his mindset, his interviews, and even his readiness for the NFL spotlight. But fast forward to organized team activities, and suddenly the tune completely changes. After watching Sanders perform during Cleveland Browns OTAs, Cowherd did a full 180. Instead of skepticism, he started praising Sanders' command, accuracy, and overall presence on the field. He didn't hedge his words either. He straight up labeled Sanders as one of the best quarterbacks on the roster, a stunning reversal that immediately caught the league's attention. Cowherd went even further. He openly suggested that Sanders should be running with the first-team offense, ahead of veteran Joe Flacco and rookie Dylan Gabriel. That's not casual praise. That's a bold statement coming from someone who was recently questioning whether Sanders belonged in the conversation at all. And this is where reality starts speaking louder than narratives. Regardless of pre-draft chatter, it became impossible to ignore what was happening on the field. Sanders wasn't overwhelmed. He wasn't hesitant. He was sharp, decisive, and comfortable running the offense. His throws were clean, his reads were quick, and his confidence showed in real time. When a critic like Cowherd changes his stance that dramatically, it says everything. This wasn't blind hype. This was evaluation based on live reps, real competition in professional settings. If someone who was once quick to criticize is now calling for Sanders to start over experienced veterans, that speaks volumes about the talent that may have been unfairly overlooked during the pre-draft process. It raises an uncomfortable but necessary question. Was all the criticism surrounding Sanders based more on perception than performance? Did people decide who he was before letting the tape tell the story? Because when football decisions were replaced by assumptions, the conversation clearly drifted away from the truth.
I know this week there was a lot of buzz around, the Giants workout, and there's a few of you quarterbacks that went out there to New York.
The visit was cool. Everything was good about it. All it is just college visits, bro. Like that's all it is, and just understanding personality. That's all top 30 visits is.
Maybe the real story was never about Sanders' game at all. Maybe his arm, accuracy, and leadership were always NFL ready. Maybe it was the media-driven narrative that overshadowed everything else, creating doubt where there shouldn't have been any. That's why the controversy surrounding Shedeur Sanders and his interview with the New York Giants refuses to die down. Until the full interview video is released, speculation will continue to dominate the conversation. Fans and analysts want transparency. They want to judge the moment for themselves instead of relying on leaked opinions and selective descriptions. The Giants have insisted that Sanders didn't perform well in that interview, but the lack of concrete proof only adds more fuel to the uncertainty. Without seeing the exchange in full context, there's no way to fairly evaluate whether Sanders truly struggled or if the moment was exaggerated. And even if Sanders did make a mistake during that interview, the bigger question still looms. Was that single moment really enough to define him? Enough to outweigh years of production, leadership, and on-field execution? Because quarterbacks aren't built in interviews. They're built under pressure on Sundays. Now another debate has started gaining traction. Why are more people suddenly calling Sanders better than Jackson Dart? When you stack the resumes side by side, the answer becomes clearer. Sanders' efficiency, decision-making, and composure consistently stand out. His stats tell a strong story. His leadership speaks even louder. And his ability to elevate the players around him has been evident at every level. While personality narratives dominated headlines, his actual football ability continued to speak for itself. The conversation may have been clouded by opinions and perception, but once the pads came on, reality didn't lie. Ultimately, this debate isn't going anywhere until every card is placed on the table. And that's the reality everyone involved has to accept. But one thing is already clear no matter how loud the noise gets. Shedeur Sanders' skill set has earned him a seat at the table. Interview controversy or not, you don't accidentally perform at that level, lead like that, and command an offense under pressure without real ability. The bigger question now isn't whether Sanders belongs. It's whether he was judged fairly from the start. Was he evaluated on tape, performance, and leadership? Or was perception allowed to creep in and quietly reshape the conversation behind closed doors? Because those are two very different processes, and only one of them leads to accurate decisions. What do you make of Shedeur Sanders' journey through the draft process? Was he unfairly labeled based on assumptions rather than production? Because when you look at his numbers, his efficiency, and the way teammates respond to him, it's hard to argue that the ability isn't there. And then there's the interview controversy with the New York Giants. Was that situation blown completely out of proportion? Or did the Giants genuinely see something that concerned them enough to shape their evaluation? Without full transparency, that question remains unanswered. And uncertainty always leaves room for doubt. How much weight should personality and media image really carry when evaluating a quarterback's future? Confidence is often praised when it fits a familiar mold, but criticized when it doesn't. At what point does confidence become a flaw simply because it challenges expectations? And let's not dodge the biggest contradiction in this entire debate. If Sanders was truly as bad as some critics claimed, why does the conversation keep circling back to one undeniable fact? So many people still believe he's a better quarterback than Jackson Dart. That belief doesn't come from thin air. It comes from watching tape, tracking growth, and understanding what actually translates to the next level. Sanders' accuracy, leadership, and poise under pressure continue to stand out. His ability to command a huddle, process information, and elevate the players around him isn't theoretical. It's been shown repeatedly, and that's why, despite the media storm, the belief in his talent hasn't faded. Now the final question becomes the most important one of all. Can Shedeur Sanders' talent and leadership overpower the narrative that's been built around him? Or will perception continue to influence how teams view him long after the facts are available? Because in the NFL, stories fade fast, but production doesn't. And if history has taught us anything, it's that quarterbacks who let their play do the talking tend to have the last word.